something's gone wrong. For all our vigilance and battle scarred over the Bill of Rights, have we let the flame of freedom's torch grow cold? Because there can be no torch to pass where there's no flame.
Freedom has only one enemy it cannot defeat, and that is negligence. So your presence here, now, today, is an act of reverence. Of all man's works beneath the heavens, none shines brighter than our Constitution. I think Jefferson and Paine, Adams, Madison, Mason, Franklin, I think they're looking down right now at us. I think they understand what we're trying to do, what we strive to do. Every time our country stands in the path of danger, an instinct seems to summon her finest first, those who truly understand her. When freedom shivers in the cold shadow of true peril, it's always the patriots who first hear the call. When loss of liberty is looming, as it is now, the siren sounds first in the hearts of freedom's vanguard.
Good evening, everybody. Joe Joseph here. The Sunday edition of Freedom Link Radio is finally here. My co-host tonight, the incredible John King. Johnny, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for having me. Hello, everybody.
And my guest tonight, guys, this is a very special treat. It's somebody who will give you hope. And somebody that I wanted to showcase tonight, I stumbled upon his YouTube channel when my wife actually forwarded me a video, and it had to do with critiquing an interview that Comedy Central did with Judge Andrew Napolitano, and it was an absolutely fantastic video. And I would like to welcome Dan, whose channel is Educatorium Euphorium, to the show. Dan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mr. Joseph. Hey, Mr. King.
So, I want to start off with a special topic, and that topic to me is homeschool. Now, Bob Tuskin, who is a radio show host on Oracle, did a great show a couple of weeks back on homeschooling. Now, you're homeschooled, correct?
Yep, I've been homeschooled for about 5 years.
And what is if you were to weigh the pros and cons to homeschooling, give us a few.
Well, the pros are obviously the great things is that, homeschooling is more like capitalism because there's the unschoolers, the people who anti-homeschooling people like to point out and say, well, look, they're not going to do well in the world. So there's the people who are doing worse off, but there's also, as a whole, homeschoolers do better off. You're allowed to pursue your own interests, and you're allowed to look at everything and what you want to. You're not all scheduled out. You have to meet certain standards, but besides that, you're free to choose what you want to do. And that's a really great thing about homeschooling because I can learn about economics and my friends can learn about whatever they want to. And the only good thing probably about public schooling is the social relationships it provides. The problem with public schooling, though, is that it's, like I said, it's very structured and you're not allowed to pursue your own talents. You're forced to just kind of fit in with the mold, and that's detrimental to people.
It most certainly is. And I homeschool my 4 kids, and it's an absolute, probably one of the best things that I have ever done. But it's one of the things that you get raked over the coals with when it comes to dealing with people, not only just in society, but other family members. If they're not on the same page, you end up being a black sheep, I guess you could say, because even though it's an old concept, and even though at one point in time everybody was homeschooled in one way, shape, or form, the prevailing opinion these days is, you got to go to a approved, accredited school, whether it be public or private. And if you don't, a lot of the perception is you're shortchanging that person. And the one thing that always seems to be the argument is, Well, the socialization, they don't get socialization. Do you get socialization?
Oh yeah, definitely. I belong to a homeschool co-op. We were talking about this earlier, and that's plenty of socialization. And it's the other thing is that you aren't forced to. There's not the cliquey stuff, and it's not. You feel less I guess you feel less inhibited with the people you talk with. There's more diversity, and it really you don't have that same kind of stigma attached to certain people in homeschooling really as public schooling.
You know what I found is that, my son went through public school for the first 8 years, and he transitioned to homeschooling in the 9th grade. And the one thing that I noticed was that in public school, there was a cool to be stupid mentality where if you were a top performer, you were looked down upon by everybody else. And if you aren't a leader or like an A-type personality, that you tend to be brought down to their level instead of them coming up to you.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that's the thing. When we transitioned to homeschool and we got involved in a co-op, what I come to find out is that there is a lot of kids that are trying to do better. It's almost like it's not so much a competition, but because that atmosphere isn't there, there's nothing hindering the progress. And the other nice thing, of course, is the fact that everybody's education is tailored towards what they want to do or what their strengths are, or like, for example, my son, he isn't so much as a matter of fact, from an English standpoint, he's okay, but it's not his strong point. But math, the sciences, and even the arts, huge, and he picks it up quick. So you can kind of see what it is that he likes, and we're to the point now where I've taught him how to learn. And one of the hardest things to do is teaching young people how to learn. Once you teach them how to learn, then everything else kind of falls in line. And he's self-paced now. I'll give him the content. This is what you're going to do this week. But the very seldom, if ever, do I have to go to him or he has to come to me for help on things, because he knows where to look. He knows how to look it up. His research skills are very much on the college level. And it's just made me really appreciate what homeschooling can do for young people if you give it the chance. But it takes a lot of work, doesn't it? I mean, especially on the parents.
Yeah, definitely. My mom's given up a lot of time homeschooling us, and she has less time to do her own stuff and clean and do all those things that a regular housewife would do. But the thing also you said that was funny is, yeah, I can relate to that, because for the first couple years of homeschooling, I was pretty much self-directed, and I did well in math and economics, but my writing suffered for it. So we chose to do something this year that was a little bit more academically rigorous. And some people might say, well, doesn't that take away from the point of homeschooling, which is to be self-directed? The thing though there is that you're not forced to. It's not like a monopoly. You don't have either homeschooling or one choice.
Right.
A lot of times you can. It's like the idea behind school choice or vouchers, whatever. You can go to all sorts of different groups and see which one works best for you. So even if you're not just flying on your own, it's like the difference between being an individual entrepreneur and someone who's a member of a business.
Fantastic. I am very encouraged that your parents allowed you to come on the show tonight, for sure. And we're going to discuss some topics tonight, folks, that should give you hope that Dan here, who's a very, very, when I say young, on the young side of teenager, very on the young side of teenager, is going to elaborate on this stuff and give his views on certain topics that we discuss on the show all the time. So I think it's important that people get a lot out of what we're going to talk about tonight, that you understand that there's a general awakening afoot in the United States, because the powers that be, whether they be left or right, it doesn't matter who they are or how they do it, they're all playing for the same team. And the sham is being exposed, and we're seeing a lot of light being shined on that. So when we come back, we're going to dive into that. You're listening to Freedom Link Radio on the Orion Talk Radio Network and AM 1650. We'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. Very, very special guest tonight. My guest is Dan from Educatorium Euphorium, the YouTube channel. Please go and subscribe to his channel. He puts out some fantastic videos on subject matters ranging from socialism to Ron Paul. You name it, he talks about it. And okay, so Ron Paul. Let's talk about Ron Paul a little bit, Dan. What's your thoughts on Ron Paul?
Well, I think something that's great about Ron Paul is that he's very, because a lot of people now, even people who really don't have credibility to do so, will talk, they'll talk against, welfare for individuals, poor people. And although that's a problem, and there's many problems with welfare, a lot of times they'll totally ignore the more important and much more detrimental side of corporate welfare, which is just as corrupting and just as corrupt as individual welfare. Mm-hmm. And so what's great about Ron Paul is that he'll say, well, we got to look at both sides. And he believes in that founding principle of equal treatment before the law. And that means that if you're going to pay one American for not raising pigs, you're going to have to pay all Americans for not raising pigs.
Would you say his views on regulation is sound, i.e. he wants to cut out Department of Education, Department of Energy, Department of the EPA, all this kind of stuff? Because and his views are, let the courts deal with that. Free markets should be able to regulate themselves in a lot of cases. And if you have problems or disputes between, say, two states or, two companies or whatever, then the courts can go and take care of that. Do you feel as if his views are utopian, or do you feel that there is that they can be realistically achieved?
Yeah, I mean, I think only utopia. I mean, utopian is more probably the thing that be applied to progressivism, where you think that the government, and I mean, if you read some words of environmentalists, you'll think they think they can organize society. That's much more utopian. But the utopian thing would be just to believe probably that government, we can just wake up tomorrow and have government disappear, because so many people have reoriented their lives around, subsidies or whatnot. You're going to have to phase it out. But no, it's not. I don't think it's utopian, really. What's funny is probably if you went back, you'd see a lot more people believing in these kinds of principles. And back then, I mean, everyone kind of looks back nostalgically on, the olden days. Back then, they were much more in for free markets and, civil liberties and whatever. I don't think it's utopian, really.
Well, that's good. I don't either. But there was an argument that I heard on the mainstream media that was saying, he's got these utopian views, like it'll never happen that way. The world just can't operate the way that he's saying it. And in truth, the world can most certainly operate the way that Dr. Paul talks about it, at the very least, the United States. But how do you see Ron Paul being able, and this is hypothetical, he gets elected to the presidency. How can one man go about changing things if you have political gridlock in the legislative branch?
Well, I think what will happen is, is kind of, it's going to have to be gradualism. It's not going to, people on both sides of the aisle, they have their special goodies, you know. The Democrats have whatever programs they want, universal daycare or whatever, and then the Republicans have farm subsidies or whatever. So, but what I think what'll happen probably is if he did get the presidency is that it would start to be chipped away in pieces. Like if you had a Democratic majority, he could agree with them maybe on stopping the war on drugs or cutting defense spending. And if he had a Republican majority, he could, you know, he could work on scaling back social programs or cutting wasteful government. So maybe it's gonna. I think the thing about Ron Paul that people don't realize is even though they consider him a libertarian, a right wing nutball, the thing is he's a he's fiscally conservative and socially liberal. So there's great potential for bridging the gap on different subjects, and he could actually be someone who really brings people together on both sides. You know, instead of someone polarizing who just wants to be in line with the Republicans, or someone who's just trying to please whatever group is popular with the Democrats right now.
One of my regular guests on the show is 2004 presidential candidate Michael Badnarik. He ran as the Libertarian Party presidential candidate in 2004. And, you know, he says, you know, the left-right paradigm for people to think that it's two-dimensional they're sorely mistaken, because we don't live in a two-dimensional world. He says we live in a three-dimensional world. So, you know, you have the left, and the left says, you know, guys, you can have your abortions, you can do whatever you want, watch smut on TV, no problem, but give us your money because we know how to spend it for you. That's the left. And then you got the right, and the right says, no smut on TV and no abortions for you, but you can have more of your money because you know how to spend it better, you know? Then you have down people, and down people are, we want your money and your rights. And that's pretty much despots, your tyrannical dictators, things like that. And what I come to like, and this is what I consider myself, and I don't know how you consider yourself, but I'm an up person, because in the end, I want my money and my rights. I want freedom. And with freedom comes personal responsibility, something that's sorely lacking today, but something that I can tell that your folks and you yourself have embraced. What do you feel, or how would you go about changing the way society thinks to become more personally responsible?
I think something that'll probably people are, even though some people don't like to admit it, people are basically they want to do what's best for them. And so I think that if people really understood like the economic case for personal responsibility, like statistics show, if you look at like poverty statistics, people who do things, you know, and there are of course some people in poverty are really people who just had bad luck, but a lot of people in poverty have made decisions, this, you know, single motherhood or things that you can see economically why there's those kinds of problems. So if we can show people, you know, being personally responsible, you know, whatever you need to do to maintain economic well-being is also what's in line with personal responsibility. And that's almost why I think that we should have maybe a mandatory class on, like, you know, how money class in school or something, instead of maybe sexual education. Take that time and teach people how to manage money and the way that the economy works, because that's going to very, very much affect them in both their personal lives and their political lives.
You really touched something that's interesting. You know, a lot of the public school mentality, it's cool to be stupid. It's cool to ride the wave. You know, I truly believe that if that mentality didn't exist, you know, we wouldn't have a lot of the problems that we have now that we're facing in America. But I look back on history, and I look at the downfall of where we were to where we are now. A lot of that has to do with the breakdown of the family structure. I truly believe that when mom started to go to work and mom wasn't at home raising the kids, that there was, you know, there's a breakdown there. What's your thoughts?
It's funny because like one of the
You know what, Dan? Let's take that after the break. I hear the bumper music and I lost track of time. So when we come back, we're going to get into the breakdown of the family structure. We got Dan on the show from Educatorium Euphorium on YouTube. Subscribe to his channel if you can. Great stuff from Dan. And we'll be right back. About 3 minutes, folks. You're listening to Freedom Link Radio on the Orion Talk Radio Network. Welcome back, folks. The email address, thefreedomlink@centurylink.net. That's thefreedomlink@centurylink.net. Thank you for all of your emails and the support. I'm joined tonight by Dan, whose YouTube channel, Educatorium Euphorium. And we were talking about the breakdown of the family structure. And so what do you think, Dan, as far as how the breakdown of the family structure has led to the degradation of society? Do you really think that, that occurred when, mom had to go to work and or like the women's lib movement took place? What do you think?
Well, yeah, just like to introduce though, is that one of the people who influenced me most in my political thinking is my dad. And my dad generally, he's not like one of those Rick Santorum social conservatives, but he's more of a libertarian kind of person.
Right.
But still, he always looks, because he was from the hippie generation, and he always looks back at that and says, I really wish I had known more, because the breakdown of the family is really kind of breaking down our civilization in sync. But the thing is that, like you said, I mean, if you look, to go back to the statistics for a minute, if you look at like poverty statistics, you'll see, like around 10%, then you'll look at single mothers and see it jump to like 33%.
Right.
And so you're right. I think part of it was like the women's lib movement, like go to work or whatever, but also, how welfare kind of incentivized single motherhood and whatever. And maybe not even like, it wasn't almost an incentive, but it changed the way the costs and the benefits worked. So the costs were lower and the benefits, stayed the same. So it was almost like the benefits went up.
Yeah.
And so, if you're going to end, it's going to encourage more of it. And so it was more than one thing. And I think you're right that also it was the women's liberation movement. And what's kind of ironic is it seems lately they've been kind of, I think I read somewhere they've been kind of saying, oh, look at all the mothers who are at work. It's
well, because they have to, because they have to. You can't be a one-income household anymore. So either you're working dad into an early grave, and he's never around, which means that you don't have the male influence at home that especially young boys sorely need if they're going to not be so sissified, I guess you could say. You have to have that male influence. But if dad's at work all the time, or even mom, then who raises the kids? The public schools. And what good a job are they doing? They're not doing a good job. They can't even teach me. As a matter of fact, with this No Child Left Behind that Bush instituted, they teach to a test to make sure that they maintain their accreditation and therefore maintain their federal funding, which is a scam in and of itself, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you have to – it's the collective that's important. You have to have the collective succeed. It doesn't matter if the individuals are not being able to exercise what their skills are in. It's just you got to have the collective, so then you keep getting your money. But, yeah, you're definitely right on that.
Let me ask you this. You brought up Rick Santorum. Is he a conservative?
He's definitely more conservative than a lot of people on that stage, but yeah, I'd say pretty well fit the conservative idea because he has that the socially conservative aspect where he's against abortion and against gay marriage and whatever. But it is that thing where you want to. He says, and he has credit because he stood up against a lot of Bush policies that were definitely not fiscally conservative. I mean, he did vote for Medicare Part D. But besides that, it seems he's mostly been pretty good on the government side of it. But it's like you said, the people who want to say, you can't watch what you want to watch on TV. We got to have the FCC step in and regulate everything. But it's fine. You can spend your money however you want.
That's absolutely right. That's the one thing about conservatism and liberalism and everything else that that bothers me is that here we were given a framework that kind of laid out the basic architecture of how government could be, how government was supposed to be, how it's supposed to operate, what the powers were, what powers were reserved to the states or to the people. And what's funny is if you ask me, you're a good conservative if you follow the rules. I mean, isn't that part of being like a conservative is to follow the rules? You know, like, for example, you're a good conservative, which means, you know, lots of conservatives are Christian or religious based. So when you have an anti-abortion stance, typically it's faith-based. It's saying, well, you know, the Bible says, you know, thou shalt not kill, and this is killing, therefore I'm against abortion. So wouldn't a good conservative then be for the Constitution? What do you think?
Well, yeah, and the thing is that, you know, the Supreme Court has made all these decisions about abortion and whatnot, and so they do have to go to the trouble of going in and amending the Constitution to get their way on abortion and gay marriage and whatever. And the thing is, like you said, though, that conservatives, the problem with conservatism is that too often it has it's gone away from this original intent, like you said, and it's become so the conservatism, something dangerous that seems to be happening with the Tea Party movement, which is really a really mainstream, almost libertarian movement, besides sometimes its social tendencies, is that the Republican Party is trying to swallow it. And the Republican Party swallowed conservatives, so a lot of times conservatives became Republicans first and conservatives second. That's why people who are supposedly conservative, you know, they would always stand up for Bush, even though Bush has an indefensible record on liberty, and from civil liberties to economic liberties. And, you know, people who are supposedly conservative, you know, just a couple days ago I heard on CNN, David Frum supposedly conservative, but he's attacking this guy who's based all his decisions and whatever in purely constitutional principles.
John King, you got anything to add to this conversation?
Yes, Joe. I'm curious to find out how the information that he has, that he's putting out there, how the young children his age receiving this information.
Yeah, how do they take it when you start talking about stuff like this? Are you finding that the information is well received, or do you get any backlash from it?
Well, like at the co-op that we go to, people start laughing because whenever they make us write like papers pretty often, and they'll always start laughing because I'll always find and we write them about like literature or whatever. So no matter what book it is, I'll always find a way to tie in economics, and they'll always laugh. They'll be like, "Oh, well, if you didn't add economics into it, we would be suspicious. Did you really write this paper?" But yeah. So some people just don't. So kids who have had this kind of base in the ideas of capitalism seem to receive it better. But a lot of the problem is that and this is something that we really need people like Richard Maybury who write economic ideas at a level that everyone can understand, which is you can't really talk to people about politics if they don't even, you know, understand economics or whatever. And too often, you know, even college students, you know, they don't understand the principles of economics. You gotta have that base.
Well, one thing that we can all say is that it boils down to this: you can't spend money you don't have. That's rule number one, Economics 101. Now, the United States, however, is one of the few countries that does it quite often, does it a lot, and it's all because of the Federal Reserve. So what's your stance on the Federal Reserve? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's much more complicated because that's just going beyond things like things that are like the welfare state or corporate welfare or whatever, something like that you can see in you can look at economic incentives and whatever. With the Federal Reserve, I mean, I think we talked about Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, which is all about how the Federal Reserve came about. it's so complicated, and they throw up so many layers, and the money trail is just so far over the world. You know, it's much harder to understand something like the Federal Reserve. And, you know, my favorite guy, Milton Friedman, he didn't think we should end the Fed, really. I don't think anyway. He said that we should more just, you know, rein it in. And people like G. Edward Griffin say we should completely end the Fed. So I think I'd more be on the line of end the Fed and let the market decide the price of money, because that way there wouldn't be these wicked fluctuations, and it would be much more easy to plan for your future.
I totally agree. I'm an end the Fed proponent, and the reason why is because we shouldn't have a private bank having direct impact on things dealing with our national security and our economic well-being. Really, it affects the very heart of our national security, if you think about it. And a lot of people has given a lot of people hope when it comes to certain things, whether it be, you know, oh man, are we ever going to make it? Are people waking up? Look, his folks are spot on. They got him. He is what we hope the next generation will be, that there is a pulling the head out of the tuchus and seeing things for what it is. And so, Dan, I want to kind of do like a rapid fire, since this is the last segment, of some issues and get your opinion on it. So let's start. First of all, you said you're a proponent of ending the Fed?
Yeah, I let the free market set the price of currency.
Very good. So end the Fed. How about S-1867, National Defense Authorization Act, and the ability now of the government to hold American citizens indefinitely without due process? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I could probably just anyone here would agree that, and it's great because it's actually uniting the left and the right. Pretty much everyone's saying it's a bad idea. The thing is, though, is that you see this is the ultimate pork. It's wrapped in a bill that funds a bunch of military things. So it's like, you know, well, we've got to pass this bill, but, you know, are we going to have to choose between having this unconstitutional provision or funding our military?
My thing is why on earth would you attach something like that to a funding bill? And of course we know the answer, because you can't go and say, well, let's introduce an amendment to do away with the Fourth Amendment and the 10th Amendment and the Fifth Amendment, heck, with the whole Constitution. You know, and that's essentially what they would have to do, would be to enact legislation that nullifies those amendments. But they're not going to do that because it would fail instantaneously, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so they either just do it by fiat or whatever. Right,
and so I think it's an absolutely horrid bill. But the flip side to that is, now it says anybody that's considered like an extremist, anti-government, anything like that. You know, the brush is broad. The brush stroke is broad when it comes to classifying who a terrorist really is. Would you say that the people in Washington, could you classify them as terrorists?
Even if I did, I don't think they'd allow the bill to pass that would name them as such. But yeah, and remember, I think if I have my memory straight, a while back there was a flap because, you know, the Homeland Security was going to classify right-wing groups that focused on issues like abortion and veterans who are coming home as watched because they might be having terrorist connections. So right. They really have no constitutional or statutory. I don't think they have boundaries to what a terrorist could be. I mean, I guess they're just relying on the prudence of the government, but that's probably not a very good thing to rely on. Not a very good thing. And if anything, it's all propaganda. You know, for example, the Department of Homeland Security says that anybody that stores 7 days or more of food is classified or can be considered as an extremist or a terrorist, which is backwards from what personal responsibility dictates. Because, you know, there was a time, Dan, when people canned their food to get through the winter. And so we've kind of become or evolved, or I actually call it devolved, into this culture of convenience.
and that there's a lot of things that people have lost their way or lost the skills to do. Have you in your education embraced any skills or things that may be lost today, as far as, in modern day society, that may have been something that was commonplace, many years ago?
Yeah. Well, generally, in public school, you're like you said, you're pretty much completely with the state-run school the whole day. Then you come home, you have a bunch of homework to do, so you don't have much time to be around the house or whatever. But I've been working with my dad more on farming or whatever, so that's a good thing. And I've been able to, besides study economics and other stuff, which is important, I've been able to learn some practical life skills, which is I wouldn't have been able to do before because time was just completely taken up, and I wouldn't have really wanted to bother anyway.
John King, you wanted to say something about canning, did you?
Yes, Joe. Many of the audience members might remember that you call me the Canning King. Back in June 1st of 2009, I took and cooked a nice juicy steak with all the fixings and the seasonings in it. I put it in a ball mason jar, and I used my pressure cooker, and I canned it. Well, I took one of those cans out of storage, and we put it with some noodles and had a very delicious meal. The meat was very, very juicy, very tender. It held its consistency, and the meal was absolutely delicious. And if my wife wouldn't have told me that she was using the meat that we canned 2.5 years ago, I'd have never known the difference. So if someone wants to learn how to can meat for preservation, I would highly recommend it.
Something else that if I can quickly mention this about canning is that people tend to see, some people tend to see people who can as people who, are like preparing for the apocalypse or whatever. But another thing to think about is inflation. I mean, food inflation. Sure. If you can get a bunch of stuff at a low price, you can buy it up and save money in the long run because, if food inflation kicks in, you're going to be making a profit because you bought it back then at a much lower price.
Dan, you bring a tear to my eye. I mean, this has to be one of the best conversations I've had in a long time on the air. And thank goodness, because, typically oftentimes I'll bring on a guest that has different views from mine or, and somewhat, and we end up getting into an argument at some point in time. But it's just so refreshing to have somebody that's so plugged in on reality. And that's really what it is. I mean, when we talk about this kind of stuff, it's reality, folks. And he's right. Right now, if you calculate inflation, pre-1980 standards, we're running about 11%. What do you think of the Fed's calculation of not including food, clothing, gasoline, energy, that kind of stuff? Isn't that a sham, Dan?
Well, yeah, the guy who probably originally got me interested in politics was Glenn Beck, and he pointed out, I think on his show once, that the Feds, because, the stagflation in the 70s was so bad, in order to make the numbers look better, they switched it. And so I think, if I'm remembering right, it's off by a factor of 10 or something around that. And, now they did, and they also, my mom's talked to me about this, they discount, I think, food and gas from the CPI anyway.
Yes.
And, food and gas would be, areas, those are the essentials. Before, if you had to survive with only two things on the CPI, it would be food and gas. So they're leaving off the two most important things. And so in the first place, even if the CPI is accurate, they're making it even worse because they're discounting a whole bunch of numbers that's just, to make the situation look better.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with you. The issue, of course, is the fact that when you have a business cycle that's run by the Federal Reserve or, foreign banks, everything like that, you're going to have bubbles. You're going to have the bubble bursting. So that it's a roller coaster ride, an absolute roller coaster ride of, the economy going up and down. But one thing that's interesting is this roller coaster ride is about to come to an end. At least that's the way I see it, because you just cannot get growth in a society where you have to tax tax people so that you can carry people from cradle to grave, or that, you have such a large welfare state. And that, I think that's one of the major problems that we've come into. And a lot of the listeners, they always say, well, I think back to the times that was. And that's really what it is. Well, I really, truly feel, and I wonder if you can weigh in on this real quick. What do you think we'll ever see life the way it was? Or do you think that we're looking at something where it's going to change permanently going forward?
Well, what's good about America, at least, is that because it's pretty much, I think, post World War I and World War II, where the European welfare states really take off, which is where we're heading to. Mm-hmm. The Europeans were pretty complacent with it. They had lost, even though England was kind of the birthplace of the modern ideas of liberty, they went all into this idea that the government could take care of everyone, including the corporations. But luckily, the United States, we always met it with some kind of blowback. And oftentimes, you'd see every once in a while, you'd see someone who is tremendously conservative. Like Ronald Reagan, in response to decades of progressivism. And so I think it's better because in America, we still have that kind of morale, and we're not like completely giving in to this idea of the government. And it seems we're like politically more resilient than people in other countries who have gone down a path similar to ours.
Absolutely. Guys, Dan's YouTube channel again, Educatorium Euphorium. Please go and subscribe today. It's been fantastic having you on the show, Dan. And I hope to have you on again someday for sure. Maybe to get an update on how you're faring at the very least, but more so we can have another discussion again about the issues, because like I said, it's so refreshing to have a young person like you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great. I usually don't get to talk to adults like this, so it's really been fun.
That's great.
Thank you so much for having me on here.
No sweat. Folks, stand by. Hour number 2 coming up in about 8 minutes. You're listening to Freedom Link Radio on